And so the same way we valued bonds and stocks and anything, we're going to find the net present value for a project. So we take the cash flows, the sum of all the cash flows discounted back by their weighted average cost of capital. And so the two projects that we're going to look at for a while in this chapter are Project L and Project S. So Project L, it stands for long because you have to wait a longer time to get the bigger cash flows at the end, like the $60 and the $80. And these are probably in millions, so just think like that so it doesn't seem so small. And then Project S stands for short because it takes a short amount of time to get the larger cash flows back. And we're going to see that because we have these two types of cash flow streams, long and short, they're going to cause some differences among the different methods that we use to evaluate them in terms of the accept or reject decision. And then this whole different delta cash flow over here where we take L minus S, like negative 100 minus negative 100 is 0, and then 10 minus 70 is negative 60. This is something that we have to use for something that's interesting to look at later. So we could calculate Project L's net present value. And I'm going to bring up the calculator and clear the last piece of work. So I'm just going to go into the cash flow register, hit second, clear work. I'm going to enter 100 as the cost, and I hit enter for that's cash flow 0 because now we actually do have a negative cash flow here. Cash flow 1 was 10, and enter. Go down to cash flow 2 and hit 60, enter. And cash flow 3 is 80, and enter. And they give me the weighted average cost of capital is 10%. So when I go to NPV, I enter 10% as my weighted average cost of capital, hit the down arrow and hit compute. And I see I get 17.78, or they just rounded 18.78, and they rounded it to 18.79. So this is a positive net present value, and we would accept this project based on this NPV all by itself. And then what about Project S? So we would go back into the cash flow, do second clear work, start entering my cash flows, negative 100, enter. Cash flow 1 is 70, enter. Cash flow 2 is 50, and I'll enter. And cash flow 3 is 20. And then I go to NPV, weighted average cost of capital for the companies is 10. So I hit enter and go down and hit compute. And I get 19.98 for the present value, and it's positive. And that means, if these were independent projects and I could afford, the negative 100, both of them at time 0, I would accept both projects because they have positive NPVs. And here's where they're showing you the calculator solution if you kind of want a backup. I know I went through it over here. So for Project L, they've got this here. So what's the reason why we use the net present value method? Well, if a project has a net present value equal to $0 exactly, then the project generates exactly enough cash flows to 1, recover the cost of the investment, and 2, to enable investors to earn their required rates of return, which was the opportunity cost of capital. So if net present value equals 0, then in a financial but not an accounting sense, the project breaks even. If the NPV is positive, then more than enough cash flow is generated, and then if NPV is negative, then not enough cash flow is generated. So if we were thinking about Project L's cash inflows, if you just added them up, they total to be $150. So they are pretty much sufficient to return the $100 initial investment and to provide investors with their 10% aggregate opportunity cost of capital. And then they still have they still have $18.78 left over on a present value basis. This $18.78, or it's probably in millions, this excess present value belongs to the shareholders. The debt holders' claims are fixed, so the shareholders' wealth will be increased by 18.78 if Project L is accepted. Similarly, for the shareholder gain for Project S would be 19.98 if it's accepted. And then I mentioned if Project L and S are independent, then both should be accepted because they both add to shareholders' wealth, and therefore that would make the stock price go up. Now, if both projects were mutually exclusive, then you should choose Project S over Project L because S adds more value to the firm than L does. One other thing to consider here is this question: would the net present value change if the weighted average cost of capital changed? And it would. The NPV of a project is completely dependent upon the weighted average cost of capital used. So every time the weighted average cost of capital changes, then the NPV of the project changes. As the weighted average cost of capital increases, NPV goes down. And as the weighted average cost of capital goes down, NPV rises.